Most of all, we're called to join God in rescuing sinners from darkness and welcoming them into God's family, not gunning them down before they hurt us.
Yeah, we can't welcome them into God's family if we're dead.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode 76, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. CooksHolsters.com. Well, for those of you new to the show, we talk about guns, hunting, competition, and the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word has to say about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. Each week we'll bring you tips from masterclass competitive shooters, instructors, hunters, and Lutheran clergy. Welcome to the show. I hope you had a great week. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your day. We've got a fun show for you today in a little different format. I did something this week that I haven't done before. I submitted Armed Lutheran Radio to Dave Jackson, the host of the School of Podcasting, for a little feedback. And the reason is something that we should embrace as gun owners, as Christians, as people. For $5, I got some good feedback from an icon in the world of podcasting, and some of what he had to say is being put into practice in today's show. So what does this have to do with you or with guns? Well, I once wrote, and you'll find it in my book, Here I Blog, which is available at Amazon.com. I once wrote that owning a gun is a lot like owning a Bible. You can buy a gun and think you know what to do with it. You think you know how to use it. Maybe you read the manual, or you've watched a video, or you've got your carry permit even. You've gone and taken that class and gotten your permit, and you think maybe that's all you need. So you put the gun in the nightstand or in the closet, and you're ready in case the home invader shows up. As a Christian, it's easy to go out and buy a Bible, take it to church, maybe even open it during the scripture readings on Sunday to follow along, take it home, put it back in the nightstand or on the coffee table, and forget about it until next week. You go to church, that's all you need, right? Well, the truth is that you can't possibly know everything, whether it's about guns or whether it's about the Bible. And if you ever think you do, you need to back up and reevaluate your life. Life is a never-ending process of learning and improvement. As a gun owner, you should be striving to improve through reading, through videos, through podcasts, through practice and training and competition. As a Christian, you should be constantly learning and improving as well by reading God's Word, studying it, sharing in Bible study, listening to good sound exegetics. Never stop learning. Never stop working to improve. So with that in mind, we've got a great show for you today. Pastor Bennett and I will be dissecting audio from the Reverend John Piper. Mia Anstine talks about air rifles. Sergeant Bill has some lessons learned the hard way about gear you should consider taking to your next match. And Aaron Israel is building on Sergeant Bill's Ballistic Minute about reality-based training, so stick around. We'll get started with Clinging to God and Guns next.
Hi, this is Gail, the Predator, from the Pro Arms Podcast, reminding you that this podcast is a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. Check out the other podcasts. It's at selfdefenseradio.net.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Time now for Clinging to God and Guns, where we examine and debunk articles, interviews, and videos that use Scripture to falsely support a position in the gun rights debate. Joining us again this week is our good friend, Pastor John Bennett from St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. Welcome back, Pastor. It's good to have you back.
Good to be back, Lloyd.
Well, this week we've got a short video from our old friend, Reverend John Piper from the Desiring God website. We reviewed one of his, I forgot to go back and look which episode it was. We reviewed a video or a podcast of his once a few episodes back.
Yeah, we did. So I brought my cocky swagger along with me today just to be prepared.
Oh, that's right. Cocky swagger. That's right. Well, this should be fun then.
Yes.
Some of that same cocky swagger comes out in this audio. This is from a video on their YouTube channel where the Reverend Piper is answering some listener email, and he gets a question about owning guns. And the question is, you recently wrote that you wished people would not buy a gun with their economic stimulus checks. This sounded to some like you are a strict pacifist who would rather avoid confrontation with an intruder than protect his family. Would you respond to this? And here is the first part of Reverend Piper's answer.
Well, I knew when I said that that's what people would think, and I chose not to answer that question. But I will say something about it now. The context was, get it back in my head, that the missionaries in 1956 who were martyred in Ecuador, they were all speared to death. And they had guns. This came out through research, and I saw it in the documentary. And they shot them in the air as the spears were going through their chests. They could have saved their lives just like that. Just shoot like this. And they didn't.
All right, so just to set the stage for what the Reverend is referring to, he's referring to Jim Elliot, Nate Saint, Ed McCully, Peter Fleming, and Roger Youderian, who were speared to death by Huaorani warriors in Ecuador in 1956. This was part of Operation Alca, which was an attempt to reach probably the most violent society on the face of the planet. Their deaths were depicted in the 2006 movie Into the Spear, and I'm assuming the documentary that Piper is referring to in this clip is Beyond the Gates of Splendor, which was released, I think, in 2004, and it was based on the book written by the wife of one of the missionaries, Elizabeth Elliot. The documentary is actually narrated by Nate Saint's son.
Oh, interesting.
And he actually grew up with those people. He actually went back and lived with those people and missioned to them, which was really amazing. But from what I can gather after watching the film and doing a little bit of reading, his account there about the guns is slightly misleading. The only person who used a gun was Elizabeth Elliot's husband, Jim, and he did actually shoot a couple of the natives.
Interesting. Okay.
He drew a pistol when the attack began. He did apparently fire hoping to scare them off, but he did actually injure two of the tribesmen. One apparently did die, and there's some debate as to whether he died from his gunshot wound.
So it would seem that Brother Piper is intentionally misleading us to fit with the talking points.
Well,
I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but
I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt on this clip because one of the pilots who flew in to recover the bodies of the missionaries tearfully recalls the fact that they had talked about they were going to carry guns or about whether or not they would carry guns when they went to meet with these Huaorani warriors, and they decided they would not use them in self-defense. They would not kill any of the Huaorani because they weren't ready to go to heaven, and the missionaries were. So Piper's quoting directly from that. Okay. Whether or not one of them actually did shoot one of the natives, there's some confusion there about what actually happened. back to Reverend Piper, the next clip gets a little disjointed because he starts talking about the Supreme Court and can't remember what amendment it is, and then he gets, which isn't funny, but then he gets off track when he remembers something about the missionaries that kind of throws off his train of thought.
And our Supreme Court just declared that which is a Second Amendment, one of the amendments, with the right to bear arms includes not just the right of a militia to bear arms, but the right of a person to have a firearm in his house. And as I contemplated those two events, watching this video of the missionaries and that new decision of the Supreme Court, probably any given intruder into my house. Oh, I left out the key thing. The reason they shot in the air is that they said earlier, they had made this comment, that we're ready to go to heaven and these natives are not. So why would we kill them rather than being killed? So I thought, if somebody enters my house as a thief, he probably is not ready to go to heaven either.
So there's the quote about not shooting the natives, and comparing it to not shooting the guy kicking in your front door.
Yeah. Before we get to that, though, here's what really irritates me. He's talking about the Heller decision. Mm-hmm. And you hear when liberals talk about the Heller decision, they say that the Supreme Court decided that the Second Amendment also includes the right for the individual to own firearms. No, the Supreme Court didn't decide that. They were just declaring what the Second Amendment already says.
Right.
Especially, and as we've discussed ad nauseum here before, if you read the Founding Fathers, if you read George Mason, if you read from Madison's notes, it was very clear that the purpose of the Second Amendment included personal ownership, especially in the event that these colonialists found themselves under the a rule of a dictator. So I hate it when these anti-gunners talk about the Heller decision that way.
Right. They like to paint it that way in when it's a decision they're not crazy about. But when they talk about something like abortion or gay marriage, they refer to it in a completely different way.
Right.
And I talked a little about that last week on the show. And it was considered at one point a collective right until the Supreme Court finally did take the case up and actually clarify that no, that was not the intent of the founders at all.
Right. Yeah, here's something that I think a lot of people don't take the time to really think about. If 5 out of 9 justices declare that the Constitution says something, that doesn't really mean the Constitution says something, because they've used that to defend slavery. They've used, I'm talking about the Supreme Court, they've used it to defend slavery, they've used it to defend segregation, things that are in defiance of what we would call natural rights. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, the Constitution is what the Constitution is. It doesn't change just because 5 black-robed justices decide it changes. I mean, granted, in the reality of the legal sense it does, but it doesn't change what the Constitution says.
Yeah, and then there's the missionary thing, which is a little bit annoying. The comparison of, dying as a missionary and not wanting to harm the people whose souls you're trying to save, and comparing that to the homeowner who is faced with a home invasion. There's no way as a homeowner that I'm going to be converting my attacker to Christ if they kick in my front door intent on doing me harm.
Right.
So a little bit misleading there.
Yeah, it's that old comparing apples to fish tacos thing. Because here you have missionaries who go into a situation intentionally. They know it's very dangerous. They know they could lose their lives. They're doing this for the purpose of bringing the gospel to the lost. Okay? Mm-hmm. And so they die. They die because, from different accounts, it would appear that they believe that their mission of bringing the gospel superseded their intent to stay alive. Now, on the other hand, if you are met with a random thug who intends to do you harm, that's a completely different situation.
Yep.
You didn't get yourself into the situation intentionally so that you could evangelize to the gun-wielding nut job.
Right.
So it just really irks me that he's using this then to jump to conclusions and say that, well, now if you're met with violence, then you have to be willing to lay down your life because the other guy might not be.
Right.
Well, no, he's not willing to or ready to die for you because he's coming to take your life. My goodness.
And I think Reverend Piper actually mentioned that in the previous episode. That was before he got into the cocky swagger stuff. So this isn't the first time we've heard this sort of comparison. But now back to Reverend Piper, who is going to try to convince us that he is not a pacifist.
No, I'm not a pacifist. I'm not a pacifist principially. I'm not a pacifist actively. So somebody asked me, so would you protect your daughter if you had a gun? And I wrote back to Abraham, one-word answer, probably. Meaning, the circumstances are so unpredictable. What would you do? Would you shoot the guy in the head, shoot the guy in the chest, shoot the guy in the leg, or throw the gun at him, or hit him over the head with it? Or, of course I'm going to protect my daughter. But I'm not aiming to kill anybody, especially an intruder who doesn't know Christ and would go straight to hell, probably. Why would I want to do that if I could avoid it?
All right. Well, he starts out reasonably enough here. Until he starts to get animated there in the middle. Obviously, the question of, it's true. Yes, it does depend on the situation. Obviously, the question of whether you use lethal force depends on what you're facing, and shooting first and asking questions later is a bad idea. But, he's doing this thing that we've seen time and time again. The anti-gunners do. They confuse the intent with the possibility, and he assumes that just because a gun can kill, then the person who's using it must want to kill.
Yeah, because possession is what determines intent, right?
Right. Right.
So by that same logic, then, if I own a large vehicle, we just had another horrific incident in London a few days ago in front of a mosque. I don't know all the details at this point, but somebody mowed down a crowd of people with a vehicle. Mm-hmm. So if I own a large vehicle, does that mean then that I intend to mow down crowds of people with it?
Right.
By John Piper's logic, I do.
And this idea that we use a gun in self-defense hoping to kill the attacker. I know people who don't really know guns think that's the case. I mean, somebody new to guns, a friend of mine back in North Carolina, once asked me if somebody breaks in your door, you shoot to kill, right? Well, no. You shoot. To use a phrase that Aaron Israel likes to use, you shoot until the bad guy stops doing bad guy things.
Right.
And if that means you miss and it scares him off, fine. If he gets wounded and he runs away or he surrenders, fine. If he gives up when he sees the gun and you never even have to pull the trigger, even better. But if he keeps coming, you keep shooting until he stops doing bad guy things.
Right.
The intent is never to kill, it's to protect. So back to Reverend Piper here.
So, no, I'm not a pacifist. I'm not a pacifist. I believe there should be a militia. I believe there should be policemen with billy clubs and guns. They should take out guys that are killing people. And I believe in the military to protect a land from aggression. And I believe that fathers should protect their children, even using force.
Okay, so there's the cocky swagger.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
He's all for the government having a monopoly on the use of force. He's cool with police coming out and killing people to protect others. Why not us? What's the difference?
Because we're just the plebeians that, no one really cares about, I guess.
I guess. If I kill somebody threatening me, or I call the police and have them come and do it, what's the effective difference morally?
There isn't any. Because all you're looking at is who pulls the trigger, right?
Right.
And if you're waiting for the police to show up and do that for you, chances are there's going to be, 2 coroner vans outside, one for you and one for the bad guy, if the bad guy's dumb enough to hang around till the officer shows up.
Yep.
But if they can avoid killing somebody, of course they should avoid killing somebody. And having a gun is a good way not to avoid killing somebody. We don't need guns in our house.
We know a good way to avoid killing people is obeying the law.
Right.
And to have everybody in society obey the law. But since we live in a fallen world, and we're all sick with original sin, that's not happening anytime soon. that not having a gun isn't going to change that.
No, you just increase your opportunity for injury and death if you own that firearm and intend to never use it to defend yourself.
Right, or refuse to have one in the first place. I mean, look at the United Kingdom, where, you just mentioned this most recent attack with a vehicle, and then we saw it in Manchester with vehicles and knives. In France and Australia, we see people victimized because the government has taken guns out of the hands of the law-abiding citizen. And it doesn't require a gun in the hands of a bad guy to do bad things. And now it's time to suggest that the Second Amendment is all about hunting.
And I'm not against hunters. Good grief. Don't get on my case. You don't write any letters about Piper doesn't believe you should have bows and arrows and rifles and hunting gear. Of course, that's a fully legitimate thing.
So hunting is fully legitimate, but self-defense or defense against tyranny is not.
Killing 4-legged critters is fine, just not 2-legged critters. Not that killing 2-legged critters is okay, but, if it means my life or his.
All right, so now we finally get to the last clip, and he's finally going to refer to Scripture. As usual, it's horrible.
I'm not going to get in your face if you have a gun lying in your drawer. I just think it's not very wise. Those who live by the gun will die by the gun.
So, this is that well-worn dead horse, Matthew 26:52. For those who are just listening to us for the first time, Matthew, what is he referring to here with those who live by the gun will die by the gun? Where is he getting this reference?
Well, it's the Garden of Gethsemane. Remember when Jesus was with the disciples during the Last Supper, he's giving them all these instructions, and he tells them, if you don't have a sword, get one, to put the very short paraphrase on it from Luke 22. And then when they come to arrest him in the Garden of Gethsemane, Peter draws his sword, cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant, to which Jesus responds, put your sword away. He who lives by the sword will die by the sword, or whoever takes the sword will perish by the sword, depending on which translation you're looking at. So what's going on here? What does this mean, to use that old Lutheran line from the Catechism? Peter comes to the defense of Jesus, or so it would seem. His intent is to prevent Jesus from going to the cross to suffer and die for his sins. But to take the sword, what does that mean? It implies a life of violence. If you take up arms, you should be willing to, or ready to, suffer the consequences of that. What Jesus is essentially saying here is that if you take up arms, if you take up the means of war, if you take up the means of bloodshed, don't be surprised if violence finds you. Some have used this to speak to many things that, we had one kook imply a while back that if you own firearms, then you are going to perish eternally because of this. I don't know if you remember that segment or not. I've heard this used to say that people who turn a firearm on themselves will perish,
right.
Suicide.
Right.
So there's all sorts of kooky interpretations out there. But what Jesus seems to be saying here, and looking at this verse in the Greek literally says, whoever takes the sword or receives the sword or chooses the sword, the word lambantes there means to take, receive, or choose, will by the sword be destroyed, will be ruined. So, I mean, we can't read much into that other than what it says on face value.
Well, yes, and like I said, this is the dead horse that every anti-gun Christian wants to bring up. Inevitably, it's ignoring the fact that Jesus instructed his disciples just less than 24 hours earlier to go buy swords, and now he's telling them, well, you're going to perish if you use them.
Right. It's like suddenly, this is now new teaching, and the old teaching no longer applies. Well, that's what Jesus, said earlier this evening when we were all lounging around eating. But now, because he said this, that no longer applies. It
was like the criticism they used to level against Obama. It's whatever he said at the moment is the only thing that mattered.
Yeah. Which again is to more or less call Jesus a liar, to say that Jesus sinned because he erred, that he misspoke, and so forth. And I've heard this argument before too, not with this passage in particular, but with other passages that, well, that's what was said earlier, but now this has been said, so that no longer applies. When does Jesus' words suddenly no longer apply?
Right.
I'm sorry, it doesn't quite work that way. He came to establish the new covenant in his blood through his cross, his life of sacrifice, and his ministry among the people of this world is the revocation of the previous covenant that God had established with his people through the system of sacrifice in the temple. So there isn't any new teaching to suddenly replace things that Jesus had taught. Right. He has the final word. And if you don't like it, too bad.
Tough toenails.
Right.
All right, so that's the end of his little anti-gun rant.
I'm sure there'll be more.
We'll dig and we'll find another one. So, I mean, he's all over the place with this whole, with the answer to this email. Maybe he shouldn't have done it off the cuff and maybe should have written something down. What are your final thoughts on his response here, and how would you respond to people who are hearing this, maybe had heard this and are forming their own opinion about whether they should own guns or not as a Christian based on Reverend Piper's beliefs here?
Yeah, looking at, what do you say to the person who hears his drivel and then start to think, well, maybe I shouldn't own a gun? You need to think for yourself, for one. Don't simply take, and same thing coming from us. Don't simply take our word for it. Think for yourself. Walk through it logically and get in the Word and see what the Scriptures say. We have examples throughout the Scriptures of God-fearing people defending themselves with lethal force. Look at the Old Testament. It is just rife with examples. You have, David with the slingshot, slaying Goliath. He stepped up as a young boy in defense of all Israel. You have other examples of this insane heroism. One of my favorites, it only gets one verse in the entire book of Judges, but you have the judge Shamgar who slays 300 Philistines with an ox goad.
Right.
It's there. You cannot come to the conclusion from reading Scripture that you must then lay down your arms and leave it all up to God. To quote one of my favorite Luther sayings, one does not sit on their couch with an open mouth and expect a roasted chicken to fly into it. God gives you means to protect your life. You don't sit there at home and expect the groceries to magically show up in your refrigerator. By the same token, then you wouldn't enter into a violent society being unarmed, would you?
Right, and it's within the freedom of a Christian to decide how to best protect your family, and there's lots of ways to make yourself safer. From, as Aaron Israel has pointed out, do the simple things first. A gun is only one piece of your home and personal security puzzle, and it's for every person. It is a personal decision whether or not you're going to own or carry a firearm. And don't just listen to us. Don't just listen to people like Reverend Piper. Everybody, and we're not going to sit here and say you've got to own a gun, and it certainly wouldn't be improper for us, and we would never do this to suggest that the Bible says you have to own one either. It's completely up to you, but you've got to think for yourself. And this kind of thing bothers me. Okay, it's one thing for to sit back and say, yeah, personally, I don't think I would own a gun, but then to pronounce the ownership of it unwise, and to suggest to other people that they shouldn't do this either because it's not right. That's why we're listening to this clip today.
Yeah, he's gone so far as to imply that it is immoral.
Yes. Yeah.
That owning a firearm makes you an individual who is ready, willing, and able to commit acts of violence. But, as far as being armed, though, go forth in the power of Christ because he's promised his protection. But remember that protection is unto eternal life. So if you lose your life, it's not because he didn't love you enough. The second thing is be armed with your wits. You talked about Aaron Israel talking about it's the little things too. Avoidance is one of the most powerful weapons that you have. Avoid those situations that could lead to violence. Avoid going through those bad parts of town that aren't safe. Mm-hmm. Just because that, the South Side happens to have your favorite donut shop, it's not worth it. Make those smart decisions. Yeah. If you live in a bad area, start finding out how you can scrimp and save and get out of that situation. So often in life, we get tunnel vision. We think that there's only one way that my life can go right now. We think there's no other way to divert from the course that we're set on. But that's not true. You always have options. Don't be afraid to open your eyes and see what's around you and figure out, how can I improve my life? How can I be in a safer situation? And at the same time, trust in Christ.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for Clinging to God and Guns. Pastor Bennett, thank you again for joining us.
It's always a pleasure, even if it's John Piper that we're looking at.
And thank you all for listening. Tune in again next week for another episode of Clinging to God and Guns right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org.
The percentage of women who own guns is growing. American women are more knowledgeable and better equipped to defend themselves than ever before. So, why is it that every time I go to a gun shop, I feel like they're talking down to me? Like, hey little lady, let me show you what you need. It's like all they want to do is sell me a pink gun. If you're tired of feeling that too, visit Guns for Gals, a specialty firearms boutique designed to empower women with information about firearm safety and to equip them with the means to protect themselves. The owners go out of their way to find products specifically for women, and they actually listen and ask questions to help you find the right products to meet your needs. If they wouldn't own it themselves, they won't sell it. Guns for Gals is located at 2035 Central Circle, Suite 108 in McKinney, Texas. Open Monday 1 to 6 and Tuesday through Thursday 11 to 7. And on weekends, you can find them at a gun show near you. Or shop online at www.gunsforgals.com. Guns for Gals. More than just a gun shop. It's how gun shopping should be.
Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstine.
Hey everybody, I hope you're all doing well. I, of course, have been on the road again. I loaded up my car and I traveled down from Colorado through New Mexico, across Texas, and into Louisiana over to Shreveport. I did happen to carry my little RM380 made by Remington. I carried that because of the concealed carry reciprocity rules among the states, so I felt a little more secure in my travels. In addition to that, I went to Shreveport actually for the Professional Outdoor Media Association's annual conference, and this year I am a newly elected board member. I've been a member of the POMA organization for several years, and now it's my turn to give back, and hopefully I can make great contributions there. And I wanted to tell you a little about not just the conference, but something that I saw during the conference. So the conference, of course, entails meetings and seminars and such like that, but we also got to go with some of the corporate partners to Range Day and Camp Day. And since this is Armed Lutheran Radio, I of course want to talk to you about Range Day. I am a fan of long-range shooting and long guns, but as many of you, if you've listened for a while, you also know that I like all guns in general. Well, there's one that I haven't talked about yet, and it's one that if you have listened to old episodes, I learned how to shoot when I was about 5 years old. This was partially because my dad wanted us to be safe, but also he got my brother his first gun, his very own gun. And I don't remember the make or model. What I do remember is that it was a handgun, but it was a pellet gun and it had CO2 cartridges which fit in the grip. That was my brother's first gun. So that was pretty exciting. And what was more exciting for me is as I was strolling along, I saw this shiny nickel-plated revolver, and I really like revolvers. I like the old Wild West, and I even have pictures of me when I was like 3 years old with my 6-shooters strapped to my hips and the holsters. And so I really am a fan of the revolver, and this revolver just glistened and caught my eye. So I had to go over to the Crossman table and check it out. And if you don't know, Crossman is air guns. So I wanted to know about this air gun because it made me a little nostalgic and took me back to those days when I had my little toy 6-shooters and my brother had his CO2 pellet gun. Sure enough, they had a Remington 1875. It is a realistic replica of the Remington revolver. So this is a single action handgun, and it has the CO2 in the grip. The grip is a faux ivory finish, so it really has just a great look to it. And I asked the gentleman there to help me, teach me how to shoot this, and I was so excited to learn about this because my brother's pellet gun was more of a semi-auto type. You put the pellet in the slide and then you were able to shoot one pellet at a time. Well, this is a 6-shooter, and of course, if you like the Wild Wild West, everybody needs a 6-shooter, right? Well, the cartridges are made to be realistic, and the pellet or even BBs from BB guns, you can put them in the rear of the cartridge where in a live cartridge you would put your primer. So you put the pellet in there, load that up, and then you're able to shoot. And I really enjoyed shooting it. It was the feel of a traditional handgun and no recoil at all. So of course it made me very aware of, your bracing and your stance and how you're gripping for recoil. It's, I think, would be a great training tool as well as something to add to your collection. So if you have time, run by Crossman's website and check out the Remington 1875. It is really beautiful, and it was a highlight that I found at the range during the POMA conference in Shreveport. Until next week, talk to you later. Have a great one, my friends.
You can read more from Mia and watch her YouTube videos at miaanstine.com.
As many of you know, Sergeant Bill and I are competitive shooters. We're also reloaders. Bill helped me to get started last year, but I've still got a lot to learn. One thing I do know, though, you need a good source for supplies and components. So let me tell you about U.S. Reloading Supply. Yeah, there are bigger suppliers out there, but what sets U.S. Reloading Supply apart from the rest is their dedication to customer satisfaction. Check them out at usreloadingsupply.com. They carry the top name brands like Starline, Rainier, Barry's, Remington, Spear, and Hornady. If you've got a special order like primers and powder that you don't see on their website, give them a call for a quote. I did and got a great price. Excellent customer service, fast delivery, prices that include shipping, and a promise to match or beat any retailer's price, including shipping. Call them today, 941-451-7357, or visit them today at usreloadingsupply.com and use the promo code Lutheran2017 to save 10% off your order. usreloadingsupply.com.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Silvia.
Hey everybody, I'm Sergeant Bill, and this is your Ballistic Minute. Today I'm going to talk about match prep. Now, this match prep is not, the practice and the dry fire and the live fire and chrono and your ammo and all that kind of good stuff. This is prepping your gear. And I'm going to start with saying over-prepare, because I've had a couple matches this year already that have been in the rain, and I wasn't quite prepared for them. I got really wet, and it kind of made the match not that fun. So like I said, over-prepare. Bring rain gear. Have all this stuff in a bag in your car or something, just in case the weather changes and you can go get this stuff and, be prepared. Rain gear, have a hat, jacket, waterproof jacket, rain jacket, poncho, something like that. Have like a big wide-brimmed hat that's waterproofed. I use some of those military-style boonie caps, and then I take some waterproofing spray and spray them down, and they work pretty good. Have some cold gear, some gloves, some hand warmers, a warmer like knit hat, maybe some long sleeve shirts. Just have some of that stuff available in case the weather turns. I live in North Texas, and the weather changes here pretty rapidly. Also have some gear for the heat. Sunblock, an extra towel, some water. Things that are going to make, being out in the heat for extended period of times a little bit more bearable. Because what it all boils down to is being cold or wet or sunburnt or just sweating to death. It just makes shooting the matches miserable. And if you're prepared for them and you're ready for any of the eventualities, it makes it a lot easier to deal with, and you can just focus on your shooting and having fun. So have that extra gear in your vehicle, including maybe an extra pair of shoes and socks and shirt, towel, the stuff that if you do end up getting wet, you can change out of it and have something dry to put on. This has been your Ballistic Minute, Sergeant Bill.
Sergeant Bill Silvia is a 15-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department and masterclass competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
Having a good holster is absolutely critical if you're going to carry a firearm for self-defense. If you need a quality holster, let me recommend Cook's Holsters. I've found Cook's Holsters in the pre-podcast days when I bought a Cook's IWB holster to write a review, and I did a lot of Kydex holster reviews back in those blogging days. But I liked that holster from Cook's Holsters so much that I applied to become an official Cook's Holsters dealer. Cook's Holsters are American-made in the great state of Georgia. They are custom molded to fit your firearm. The advantage of Kydex over other materials is that it holds its shape. It doesn't stretch. It doesn't lose retention. It won't wear on the finish of your firearm the way leather will, for example. They're available for hundreds of gun models. They're in dozens of color combinations and different printed patterns and camouflage. They're great for concealed carry, for range work, for competition. They come with a lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Check them out today, www.cooksholsters.com, or visit the Armed Lutheran shop at armedlutheran.us/shop. Use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST to save 10% off of your order, and make sure you've got a quality holster and don't settle for anything less. Go to cooksholsters.com today.
It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense here with your personal defense tip of the week. This week I want to talk to you about something Sergeant Bill touched on a few weeks ago, and that's reality-based force-on-force scenario training, where you use sim guns to shoot at each other and you interact with role players and you learn how to apply your concealed carry skills, or in Sergeant Bill's case, law enforcement skills, with trained role players that are designed to elicit certain reactions out of you and see how well you do, and train you on how to interact with your firearm in an armed situation where you have to deal with bad guys and good guys and all the things that can happen in those situations. First off, I want to point out that before you participate in reality-based training, you need to make sure that you actually have training before you go in there. So you don't want this to be your first step. If you haven't taken some sort of defensive shooting class, if you haven't taken some sort of legal preparation class, then you don't want to go into these situations not knowing what to do, because reality-based training is really about going in there to test and see if you do the right things when you're presented with scenarios. So if you don't know what the right things are, it's not going to be very valuable to you. Now, a lot of these reality-based training programs will have a classroom portion first where you learn the skills and things that are going to be tested in the class before you go through the class. Those are great, but just make sure that whatever reality-based training you participate in, that you actually get some training before you just get thrown into a scenario, because you're not going to do very well if you don't know how to do what you're supposed to do when you get in the scenario. The second thing is make sure you vet the place that you're getting the reality-based training from. And the first place to look is for where they developed their curriculum, where they got their certification. Unfortunately, it's very easy to get on the internet, go to one of these simunition type companies, and get their training certificate from watching a couple online videos, and they say you're certified to train people with their simunition ammo. That's really a marketing ploy to help get the product out in the market, but it really doesn't do anything to develop those instructors so that they really know how to run a safe and efficient and effective reality-based training program. One place you can look to see if the place is any good is the Reality-Based Training Association, which is an association set up by a guy named Ken Murray, who's one of the pioneers in the industry, and he's done a lot of work to make sure that people are on the same page as far as safety protocols, how to effectively run scenarios, how to train role players, what kind of reactions you're trying to elicit from the participants. And you can get with the Reality-Based Training Association, just Google it, and hit them up and see if the place that you're going to train is somebody who's legitimate. And if they're not, they can tell you, and they may not have an opinion at all, but most of the time they're going to do the research, they're going to look at that person, they're going to say, okay, yeah, this is a school that we recommend, or it's not. And if they don't get the nod from the Reality-Based Training Association, if they don't sign off on them, or if they don't have some kind of credentials besides what the ammunition company gives them, then I'm going to ask some more questions, and I'm probably going to walk away from that class. If they don't have some kind of a legitimate certification, you want to know where that curriculum came from, that somebody didn't just make it up overnight and come in there and start training you up on that stuff. So certification is important. Make sure you check that. And the next thing is you want to check their safety protocols. That's really the most important thing. When you show up for the class and you get ready to go in there and start training, the safety protocols are going to be very important, because you could very easily end up having a live round get mixed in, end up having a live firearm get mixed in if the safety protocols aren't very thorough. The first thing you're going to be looking for is very thorough pat-downs. There needs to be a clearly designated training area where there's not any live ammo or live rounds or live firearms allowed past that point, and they're patting people down as they go in and out of that training area. If they don't have that area roped off with one entrance, one exit, and pat everybody down, the participants, the role players, the instructors, everybody needs to be going through that safety protocol. And if you don't see that happening, then you need to run away from that class, because that could very easily turn into a bad situation. There was a situation not long ago where a lady went to participate in a Citizens Police Academy, and they did a quote-unquote scenario at the end of it, and since they didn't follow a proper safety protocol, nobody got patted down, a live firearm with a live round made it into that scenario, and she ended up getting shot and killed as a result. So if you don't see those very thorough pat-downs taking place to make sure there's no live ammo coming into that training situation, then you need to run away from that class. You don't want to be part of that situation. The second thing is the safety gear. There shouldn't be any exposed skin on your body when you're participating in reality-based training. Though it's probably not going to seriously injure you, you can get hurt pretty bad with some of those training cartridges, especially if you get entangled with a role player and you get shot at close point-blank range, whether it's you or them getting shot. You don't want any exposed skin on your body. You should have a hood on, a groin protector. All of your exposed skin should be covered with something. You should have gloves on, because all of those training rounds can seriously injure you if you get shot by one of them. Now, I say serious injury, it's kind of relative. You're probably not going to bleed out or anything, but you don't want to be injured by those projectiles, especially when you're in close proximity. So make sure that safety gear is there. That includes hoods, that includes masks, that includes goggles, that includes all of those things. If you want to look for an example of it, go on the Reality-Based Training Association, and they've got some pictures of what proper safety gear looks like. The next thing, do they have clearly scripted and rehearsed role players that are designed to elicit specific reactions from you? If you show up at a class and it's you and a bunch of armed citizens and they say, okay, you guys are the good guys, you guys are the bad guys, and y'all are going to come be our role players, that's a problem. They need to have trained, rehearsed role players who know exactly what they're supposed to do based on what you're doing in the scenario to try to elicit specific reactions out of you. If they don't have that, if you're just essentially playing paintball with your buddies, that's all fine and good. It might be a fun time, but there's no training value in that. The role players have to be rehearsed. They have to be trained. They have to know what they're supposed to do when certain things happen in the scenario. And if they don't have those type of role players on staff, then it's not going to be worth your while to participate in that training. Then on top of that, if it's just one of these situations where they throw you into a scenario just to quote-unquote see what happens. Like you see them on the news sometimes. Like they'll bring armed citizens into this scenario training. They'll put them through an active shooter scenario, whatever it may be, and the armed citizens will fail miserably. People will die. It'll be a big body count. The role players just jack them all up with rifles, and then they go and debrief, and you hear people say things like, well, I learned that I have a lot to learn about concealed carry and that it's really difficult to survive one of these situations. Well, okay, we knew that going in. That would be like you going on Top Chef and being asked to cook a souffle when you don't have any chef training, and then when you go in front of Gordon Ramsay, he cusses you out and tells you how terrible you are. You already knew that you weren't a good chef, and it doesn't do you any good to go and embarrass yourself and ingrain that failure by doing it wrong. Now, you're going to fail in reality-based training, don't get me wrong. You're supposed to fail some of these scenarios, but they're also supposed to give you the right answer. If you fail, they should let you run the scenario again and again and again until you get it right, because you don't want to ingrain failure by letting someone do something wrong. So if they're not letting you run that scenario until you get it right, then it's also a waste of time. There needs to be a training goal, and the training goal ought to be you doing whatever the scenario is and surviving that fight at the end of the day by doing what you're supposed to do. So you got to know what you're supposed to do, be coached through it as needed, and run the scenario until you get it right. So don't participate in these let's see what happens if, some crazy scenario happens and everybody dies. Like if they run you through that, you need to be asking the question, okay, what should I do? Let's run that again and let me try to do what I'm supposed to do, and let's see how it comes out this time with a really solid debrief and all that. Debrief being the very most important thing at the very end is debrief what you did. What did you learn? What were your takeaways? And if your takeaways are just, oh, I was terrible, well, that's not a very good takeaway, because that's, once again, ingraining that failure. So those are some things to look for when you look at a reality-based training class. Certifications, where do they get their curriculum? Is their safety protocols on point? Is their safety gear on point? Do they have trained, rehearsed role players with specific goals? And do they let you do the scenario enough times to get it right? And those are some things for you to look for. And that's your personal defense tip of the week. Thanks.
Aaron Israel is a Personal Defense Network contributor and owner of Fundamental Defense. You can find out more and sign up for any of Aaron's classes at fundamentaldefense.com.
And that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you to my awesome cast of contributors, Sergeant Bill Silvia, Aaron Israel, Mia Anstine, and Pastor John Bennett. And thank you, dear listener, for joining us, for downloading, for subscribing to the podcast, for making this show a part of your week every week. We really do appreciate it. Be sure to check out our membership site, gunclub.armedlutheran.us. It's the Reformation Gun Club. For $15.17 a year, you get lots of great members-only content, free swag, and exclusive discounts. And be sure to check out the ebook, Here I Blog, available for your Amazon Kindle at the Amazon Kindle store at amazon.com. I hope you'll join us again next week. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.